Aviation and the latest issue for the airplane manufacturer's MAX 8 fleet. Pilots on one of those planes forced to make an emergency landing in Florida on Tuesday.
Tower Southwest 8701, we just launched our right into news, clear emergency, flight heading 0.
The Southwest Airlines flight from Orlando to California was actually being done for taking the plane to storage because the fleet has been grounded after those two deadly crashes. There are no passengers on board. The plane landed safely. The airline said a performance issue with one of the engines, not related to a computer system, that's under scrutiny in those MAX 8 crashes. The emergency landing comes a day before a pivotal Senate hearing on aviation safety oversight. Joining us now from Perth in Australia, Geoffrey Thomas, Editor-in-Chief and Managing Director at AirlineRatings.com. It's been a while, Geoffrey. Good to see you.
Hey, John.
Okay, very quickly on the engine problems for the Southwest crew, totally unrelated to the two fatal crashes, but still pretty much the last thing Boeing needed right now.
Look, absolutely, John. The last thing they needed is some more publicity relating to the MAX. Yes, totally unrelated, nothing to do with the NCAS system, and safely landed, and it'll make its way onto Victorville for storage when they repair the engine.
Okay, so by the end of this week, Boeing hopes to have its final submission to the FAA on its software update for the anti-storm MAX system. According to our own reporting, pilots from the company worked with the software design team to incorporate multiple layers of protection in the event of sensor errors or other erroneous inputs. A response that would address the failure that is believed to have doomed the Lion Air flight last year, that had received faulty data from a malfunctioning sensor on the nose of the plane. There's a couple of issues here, but first, the big picture. There's some suggestion that aviation authorities in Canada and Europe, they'll want to test the software patches themselves, regardless of what the FAA decides. I can't recall a ruling by the FAA that was just not universally accepted around the world. If the Canadians and the Europeans and other countries go down this road, this is a crisis of confidence, not just in Boeing, but the FAA.
Look, it is indeed, and it is actually very, very unfortunate. This has entered into the realm of politics and a lot of scrutiny, which, of course, scrutiny is important to make sure the FAA is working correctly. But it's been working with Boeing in this particular fashion and with other manufacturers for decades and decades. This isn't something new. This is the way the Boeing 787 was certified. And the Boeing 787 is a shining example of a superb product from Boeing, although they did have the battery issues, which were nothing to do with the certification process. It was actually a supplier problem. So these things are coming into scrutiny. Also, what we're getting, John, is a lot of misinformation out there about the 737 MAX. There are suggestions that the aircraft was rushed through. In fact, the opposite is the case. The certification of the MAX was almost the slowest of any 737 model. And there's also suggestions that Boeing makes money out of safety options. Well, the reality is both Airbus and Boeing hate safety options. They hate any options because they snarl production lines and slow things up and actually cost them money. So there's a lot of misinformation out there about the MAX and the industry in general. And there's a lot further to go in these investigations before we really get to the real truth of the situation.
Okay, which is interesting because I want to get down to this issue with the faulty sensors, because a faulty reading from an angle of attack sensor, that's the sensor which warns if the plane is at risk of stalling, is believed to be the cause of the Lion Air crash in October, possibly related to the crash in Ethiopia a few weeks ago. The software patch from Boeing is meant to fix that problem. But here's part of a report from the Seattle Times. The context here, Boeing started in Seattle a century ago, so these Seattle Times is actually across this story. The company typically uses 2 or even 3 separate components as fail-safes for crucial tasks to reduce the possibility of a disastrous failure. So even some of the people who worked on Boeing's new 737 MAX airplane were baffled to learn that the company had designed an automated safety system that abandoned the principles of component redundancy, ultimately entrusting the automated decision-making to just one sensor, a type of sensor that was known to fail. According to this report, installing 3 sensors would require a major retrofit. Ultimately, though, how big of a problem is this looming for Boeing?
Well, look, a couple of comments there, John. A very interesting article from the Seattle Times. But the other issue is here. When you have a stabilizer, this MCAS system activates a stabilizer runaway. When you have a stabilizer runaway, there are 2 switches between the pilots. You switch them off, it cuts the system out. That has always been there on the 737. on the previous model, the NG, there are 4 things that can cause a stabiliser trim runaway. The pitch down, the nose pitch down that we've been talking about. On the MAX, there's 5. So, the rule for dealing with it is the same for the MAX as it is for the NG. You simply switch the stabiliser trim off. You cut the power to the motor that drives this stabiliser trim. It's a memory item. You don't need to look up a manual for it. It's a memory item. And that's what's baffling a lot of people is why the pilots of these 2 airplanes, if this is what turns out to be the cause, why they didn't switch this system off.
Well, okay, so with that in mind, the New York Times has this report that during recent simulations which recreated the conditions, the Lion jet crash, pilots had about 40 seconds to override the automated system and rectify the problem. I guess if you know what to do, that's actually a good chunk of time. But if you're unaware of how the system works, because there's been like a training, which is what the suggestion is, this is potentially a problem, isn't it?
Look, there's different ways of interpreting this. There's different ways of reporting this. For 737 pilots, there's a thing called runaway stabiliser, uncommanded stabiliser trim movement. And there's 1, 2, 3 actions to take. The first action is disengage the autopilot, disengage the auto throttle. The third action is to switch it off. It is a memory item. Now, 40 seconds, I'm surprised it took the pilots 40 seconds. It should have taken them about 15 seconds to override it. I've spoken to a number of 737 check captains who do this stuff all the time, and they're very surprised by that 40-second number. They said 15 seconds and we can have this under control. And the stabiliser trim for viewers is not a sort of a system that's in the background. It's a big wheel that sits beside the pilot and the co-pilot, and it spins around. It makes a lot of noise. It's very visual. You absolutely know you have a runaway stabiliser, and you absolutely know, committed to memory, you switch it off. And that's the perplexing part about all of this debate, is why these pilots on Ethiopian and Lion Air, if this is what we end up learning was the case, why they didn't turn it off. And on that score, John, is why the Ethiopians and why the Indonesians have not released the cockpit voice recorders from both of those crashes, so we can all better understand actually what went on in those cockpits.
Yeah, very quickly, we're out of time, but are they obliged to release the data from the cockpit voice recorders?
They are. Well, it varies from country to country, but because of the importance of this particular investigation to the global fleet and to passengers generally, they've got an obligation to release it, and they should release it.
As I said, we're out of time, Geoffrey, but thank you so much. It's been a while. Good to see you.
Pleasure.